Battle of Agincourt, the bloody road through Harfleur. What happens when a young king with a shaky crown decides to invade a kingdom in chaos? Why did Henry V cite the Bible to justify the slaughter of an entire town? And how did a port city with just 250 defenders hold off one of the most powerful armies in Europe for over a month? This is the story of bombardment, betrayal, and biblical threats, where every sunrise brought a new disaster, and every night was spent rebuilding what had just been destroyed. If you think medieval warfare was all about swords and glory, think again. This is mud, madness, and monarchs on the edge. It all began in 1337, not with a bang, but with a claim. The English crown, ever ambitious, decided it had a legitimate shot at the French throne. Why? Because Edward III, England's king, was the grandson of Philip IV of France. And if medieval Europe had a motto, it was, if you can't inherit it, invade it. Thus began the 100 Years' War, a century-long tug-of-war that saw England snatch glorious victories at Crécy and Poitiers, where longbowmen turned chivalric charges into pincushion parades. France bled territory, and England basked in the spoils. But then came the Black Death, dynastic squabbles, and a general lack of follow-through. By the early 1400s, England's once proud holdings in France had shriveled to a patchwork quilt of castles and complaints. In 1413, Henry V, just 26 years old, inherited the English throne from his father, Henry IV, the man who had booted Richard II off the throne like a medieval game of musical chairs. But Henry's crown came with baggage. Nobles whispered that he was the son of a usurper, and conspiracies brewed like bad ale. Henry crushed the dissent with ruthless efficiency. Heads rolled, plots fizzled, and suddenly England had a king who wasn't just wearing the crown, he was owning it. But Henry wasn't content with domestic dominance. He looked across the Channel and saw opportunity. France was in chaos. King Charles VI was battling mental illness, and the French court was a Game of Thrones episode waiting to happen. Nobles squabbled, factions formed, and governance was basically a medieval shrug. Henry made his move. He demanded Aquitaine, Normandy, Maine, Anjou, Touraine, Brittany, and Flanders, which, fun fact, had never been English. Princess Catherine's hand in marriage, a dowry of 2 million crowns, and the 1.6 million crowns still owed from the ransom of King John II, captured at Poitiers. Total bill, 3.6 million crowns, enough to buy 45,000 war horses, or in today's terms, roughly $550 million. Henry was basically asking for France's wallet, daughter, and dignity. In return, he'd graciously renounce his claim to the French throne. The French response? A polite non, offering just 600,000 crowns and a slightly enlarged Aquitaine. Henry took this as a personal insult. Diplomacy had failed. Time to pack the longbows. Henry had been preparing for war long before the negotiations collapsed in June 1415. He secured the neutrality of John the Fearless, Duke of Burgundy, effectively stripping France's coast of naval defense. And so, on August 11th, with a fair wind and a fleet that looked like a floating forest, Henry V set sail for France. On August 14th, the skies over Normandy were clear, the sea calm, and the town of Harfleur, a bustling port with 5,000 inhabitants, was going about its business. Fishermen cast their nets, merchants opened their stalls, and the town's garrison of 250 men probably thought they'd have a quiet day. Then, like a scene from a medieval disaster movie, sails appeared on the horizon. Hundreds of English ships, bristling with soldiers, siege weapons, and ambition. The English invasion had arrived. Henry's first objective was clear: take Harfleur. The town had long been a launchpad for French raids on English ports. Capturing it would secure a base of operations and reduce threats to England's southern coast. Upon landing, Henry deployed his forces strategically. His brother Thomas, Duke of Clarence, blocked the eastern approach. Henry positioned the main army and siege weapons, including 12 guns, which were dragged through mud and misery to batter the town's 4.5-meter thick walls, 24 towers, and water defenses. The siege was brutal. Harfleur's defenders fought valiantly, but they were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. Supplies dwindled, morale cracked, and the town's fate was sealed. Now pause for a sec. Join the front lines of history and power. Welcome to European battle, where epic clashes, legendary warriors, and untold stories come alive. By subscribing and turning on notifications, you're not just joining a channel, You're stepping into a world of thrilling battles. From ancient empires to modern warfare, we deliver cinematic storytelling, expert insights, and exclusive content that will leave you breathless. Don't just watch history, live it. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to never miss a moment of the action. European battle where legends clash. It was August 1415, and King Henry V had arrived in Normandy with a fleet so vast it made the locals think the apocalypse had come early. His target? Harfleur, a fortified port town that had long been a thorn in England's side, a launchpad for French raids and a symbol of defiance. Henry didn't waste time with pleasantries. He sent a message to the townsfolk, not with flowers or wine, but with biblical fire and brimstone. Citing Deuteronomy 20:10-13, he reminded them that if a city refused to surrender, its people could be put to the sword. And since Henry claimed the French throne by divine right, he wasn't just a king. He was, in his mind, God's chosen landlord. The message was clear: yield or face holy wrath. But Harfleur wasn't about to roll over. Just as Henry's brother, Thomas, Duke of Clarence, moved to encircle the town from the landward side, a relief force of 300 French men-at-arms thundered toward the gates. Led by the seasoned Raoul de Gaucourt, they weren't an army, they were a statement. Their arrival electrified the town's defenders and stiffened the resolve of the citizens. Then came the French countermeasure. They closed the sluice gates, flooding the valley to the north. The landscape turned into a watery moat of defiance. Harfleur had made its choice. It would not yield. Henry responded like any king with siege weapons and a short temper. His siege train roared to life, launching projectiles that smashed towers, cracked walls, and even reached the town's inner buildings. The sky rained death. For the townsfolk, every sunrise came with the question: will the roof still be there by nightfall? But Harfleur wasn't just ducking and praying. The defenders manned their own engines, firing back with catapults and cannons. They targeted Henry's gunners and siege crews, who had to operate dangerously close to the walls. English losses mounted. The king's prized engineers were being picked off like apples in an orchard. And when the sun dipped below the horizon, the defenders didn't sleep, they rebuilt. Frantic repairs were made under torchlight, patching breaches and reinforcing bulwarks. The English, watching from their camps, were astonished and infuriated. Every crack they made by day was sealed by night. By early September, 15 days into the siege, the flooded valley had turned foul. The summer heat baked the stagnant water into a disease-ridden swamp, buzzing with flies and reeking of decay. The English army, camped nearby, began to suffer. Dysentery, the medieval army's worst enemy, spread like wildfire. Soldiers collapsed in their tents. Horses grew sick. The air was thick with the stench of waste and rot. Henry's mighty force was now a sickbed with swords. Henry, ever resourceful, ordered mines to be dug beneath the walls. The plan? Collapse the tunnels and bring the fortifications down from below. But Harfleur had its own engineers, and they were just as stubborn. Counter-tunnels were dug, intercepting and sabotaging the English efforts. Underground skirmishes broke out in the dark, damp soil. It was a war beneath the war. Above ground, Henry ordered wooden siege towers to be rolled forward. These towering contraptions were meant to breach the walls and unleash English fury. But by now, the siege had dragged on for a full month, longer than Henry had planned, and far more costly. The conditions were appalling. A contemporary chronicler blamed it on unripe fruit, grapes, and shellfish, which sounds like the worst medieval buffet imaginable. But the real culprit was filth and overcrowding. Thousands of men, horses, and animals packed into a small area, with nowhere for waste to go but into the water and air. Dysentery ravaged the ranks. Earls, knights, esquires, and archers fell ill. Some died. Others were granted permission to return to England by ship once the siege ended, assuming they survived the journey. Henry's army was bleeding, not from swords, but from sickness. Despite the horrors, Henry pressed on. Harfleur was battered, but not broken. The king's ambition burned brighter than the fires on the battlefield. He had come to claim France, and Harfleur was just the first step. By early September 1415, the siege of Harfleur had become a slow-motion disaster for both sides. The English camp, already ravaged by dysentery, was now a swamp of sickness and stench. But inside the town, things weren't much better. Reports began to trickle out. Disease had breached the walls, and the defenders were suffering too. Yet Harfleur refused to break. Then, like a scene ripped from a medieval action film, the defenders struck back. Raoul de Gaucourt, the iron-willed commander of the garrison, led a sortie, a sudden, furious charge out of the gates. French men-at-arms surged forward, setting fire to Henry's siege bastion, torching English equipment, and sowing chaos before retreating back behind their walls. It was a bold move, and it worked. Henry now faced the grim prospect of a prolonged siege, with his army growing weaker by the day. For the English king, it was now or never. Henry chose now. He ordered a desperate assault on the bulwarks outside Harfleur's main gate. The sky darkened with a rain of arrows, as English longbowmen unleashed flammable shafts that set one of the towers ablaze. Smoke curled into the sky. Flames licked the stone. With the tower burning, English men-at-arms charged, swords drawn, shields raised. The French defenders fought back with ferocity, but the tide was turning. John Holland, Earl of Huntingdon, led the assault with brutal precision, and the English seized control of the gate fortifications, forcing the defenders to retreat deeper into the town. The next day, Henry tried diplomacy again, or at least his version of it. He demanded surrender. Again. The answer? Still no. Frustrated, Henry sounded the trumpets. The message was clear. Prepare for a full assault. He ordered his remaining guns to bombard the town relentlessly, day and night, denying the defenders even a moment's sleep. Inside Harfleur, fear began to spread. Henry had already cited biblical law, the kind that permitted the slaughter of a town's population if they refused to yield. The threat was real, and now, with the walls cracking and the gates compromised, sections of the population began to waver. Then, a flicker of hope. The defenders agreed to open negotiations. Talks dragged on for 2 days. On September 18th, Harfleur's officials agreed to a conditional surrender. If no relief force arrived by September 23rd, the town would yield. Raoul de Gaucourt sent urgent messages to the French High Command. But the reply was bleak. The French army hadn't gathered enough troops to give battle. No help would come. And so on September 22nd, with no other choice, Gaucourt surrendered the town. Henry entered Harfleur not as a conqueror, but as a king who had paid dearly for victory. The leading members of the garrison were released, on the condition that they report to Calais as prisoners. English officials took control, and the French inhabitants were given a choice: swear fealty to Henry or leave. Many stayed, many left. The town was now English, but it had come at a steep price. The siege had been brutal. A third of Henry's army was dead or incapacitated. Dysentery had done what swords could not. Knights, archers, squires, all struck down by disease. Henry now had roughly 7,100 troops left. After a brief rest, he garrisoned Harfleur with 300 men-at-arms and 900 archers, and then set off into the rolling countryside of Normandy with 900 men-at-arms and 5,000 archers. Where was he headed? To destiny. To a muddy field. To Agincourt. Next up, Battle of Teuton. The story doesn't end here. It only gets better. The next chapter is filled with mud, madness, and military genius. So if you want to see how Henry turned a weakened army into a legendary force, follow us, subscribe. Click the notification bell so you never miss another epic tale from the medieval front lines. History is calling, and it's wearing chainmail.